Great. Well, welcome everybody. Steve Grove here, Commissioner of Deed, and welcome to our April monthly jobs report press conference. I'm excited today to be joined by our Labor Market Information Director, Oriana Casal, and we're excited to walk through these numbers with you and take your questions as well. April's job report is particularly unique because this is the first jobs report we've had where you can compare kind of year over year to the pandemic numbers that hit last April. April was, of course, the big month when job loss happened across our country as COVID really started to accelerate and economies across the country and world shut down parts of their industry to prevent the spread. And so we're now at a point where we can start to take a kind of year-long look back at our economy today and our economy as it was when this pandemic began. As you recall, we lost about 416,000 jobs in Minnesota when the pandemic hit, an extraordinary number that happened really in the blink of an eye. And since then, we have made recovery. We've gained back now 235,000 jobs, about 57% of the jobs that we lost when the pandemic first struck. As a whole, in April, if you take a look at this month just in particular, you'll all recall the U.S. jobs report that came out a week and a half ago or so. Those numbers surprised economists who were expecting job growth more in the millions and saw a number that was 266,000, just 0.2% growth in April, seasonally adjusted. Minnesota, we did a little bit better than the rest of the country. We gained 11,300 jobs, up about 0.4% in April on a seasonally adjusted basis. In the private sector alone, that was 8,100 jobs, up 0.3%. So last month, we had 21,000 jobs come to Minnesota. This month, 11,300. So the growth continues, although similar to the country as a whole, we didn't see that growth increase over this month. We saw it go down by a little bit. In terms of specific sectors, job gains were prominent across a host of sectors. I always mention leisure and hospitality because that's on so many people's minds, given the struggles that industry has had. We saw 3,100 new jobs join leisure and hospitality in April. And just to put that in perspective, in terms of the big picture, of the 147,000 hospitality jobs that we lost last April, we've now gained back about 88,000 of those. So we are making progress. People are going back to work in a whole host of sectors. We saw big gains in professional and business services, up about 5,000 jobs, government up about 3,200 jobs, trade, transportation, and utilities up about 2,500 jobs, and construction went up 1,100 jobs. Construction, notably, is the first industry that we've seen gain back fully the jobs lost due to the pandemic. So construction is now back in the positive column for job growth compared to even where the COVID-19 job losses hit. So that's a good thing. We did see some job losses in education and health services, financial activities, and in information. Our employment rate as a state ticked down again by a tenth of a percentage point to 4.1%, down from 4.2%, which is a revised number for March. That largely did come because people were going back to work, so that's a good thing. But we know we need more Minnesotans to get back to work in the future. And I'll say that every month as we look at our unemployment insurance numbers, and every week, in fact, about 10,000 people or so, 10,000 weekly benefit claims or so every week drop off those numbers. So we are seeing Minnesotans go back as our economy grows and continues to recover. As we have noted in several of these calls over the past year, Minnesotans who are people of color have been the hardest hit by the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, and these numbers this month reflect that once again. Our unemployment rate for Blacks is at 8.9%, for Hispanics at 7.7%, compared to whites at 5.6%. Those numbers largely stable from last month, so not a lot of progress in that front when it comes to unemployment rate for Blacks and Hispanics, which are the numbers we can track given the data available. So, stepping back for a second, it's an interesting moment in our economy. And in some ways, it's kind of a weird moment in our economy. We're in a moment of transition, moving from really a pandemic economy to a new economy. And that's going to take some time to happen. There's going to be some friction along the way in this recovery. Even if everyone, got vaccinated today, things wouldn't just snap back into place instantly. We are seeing people get back to work. As I said before, the number of weekly benefit payments we're making on UI going down by around 10,000 or so every week. But there's clearly still uncertainty in the marketplace, both for businesses and for employers. But as we've seen every month, with each step we take forward, we are getting stronger. We know that individuals who are on unemployment insurance are searching for jobs in Minnesota. we never dropped the work search requirement for those who are receiving those weekly benefits. So every week we are engaging our unemployment insurance recipients on their job search prospects and really trying to help them navigate this new economy. It is a challenging and different economy, and we aren't just going back to the one that we had before the pandemic. And so every week we're calling thousands of unemployment insurance recipients over the phone, talking through the job options that exist in our market with them, talking through training opportunities that might help them get to where they're going, and talking about their work search in particular and the jobs they're applying for, and what kind of success they're having in finding employment moving forward. But I think it's important to note that for workers and for businesses, there just remains, I think, in this transitional moment, some uncertainty. And it's not any one thing. There's a lot of factors at play here. There's safety in the workplace. There's childcare considerations. There's trying to make sure the job that you get is one that pays you a family system that provides for your family. And I think it's a moment when a lot of job seekers are trying to make sure that they do well for their families as they get back into the marketplace. So we are really laser focused on getting Minnesotans back to work, working through our Good Jobs Now campaign to make those outreach calls, to have those conversations, to make sure work search is happening across our system, and working with businesses we talk to every day of the week on what their needs are and how we can connect them with workers who are a fit for their job. So it's a unique time in our economy. Oriana will go more into the details, and then we'll be happy to take your questions. So Oriana, over to you.
Thank you. So this is our unemployment rate slide. All of the decline in the unemployment rate this month was due to people moving from being unemployed into jobs. So the number of people unemployed fell by about 3,000. The number of people employed grew by a little over 3,000. This brings the employment to population ratio up 0.1 of a percentage point to 65.0% this month in April. But it was 67.8% in February 2020. So we still have a way to go in terms of moving people into employment. The labor force size overall stayed about the same in April. It rose by only 75 people. And this leaves us 94,600 people short of our labor force size prior to the pandemic. So those are the people that will need to be, that over the next couple months will be moving back into the workforce. You can go on to the next slide. This is our unemployment by race, ethnicity, and gender slide that we display for you every month. So in terms of these 12-month moving averages, all groups saw declines in their unemployment rate in April, with the exception of Latinx workers who were level with last month at 7.7% unemployed. Women and Black Minnesotans saw the largest increase in unemployment during the pandemic. So overall, from this whole period of time, February 2020 through April 2021, rates for these two groups are still up 3.8 and 4.4 percentage points respectively compared to February 2020. The labor force participation rate, which isn't on this graph, rose for all groups in April, with the exception of men, where it was flat compared to March. So compared to prior to the pandemic, in terms of labor force participation rates, Black Minnesotans and men saw the greatest decline in labor force participation, and labor force participation rates actually rose for Hispanic Minnesotans. So, and women, which nationally women have seen a big decline in labor force participation. In Minnesota, women also saw a decline, but it was less than 1 percentage point. It was 0.9 percentage points, and white Minnesotans saw a 0.7 percentage point decline. So women in Minnesota have not been impacted quite the same way as they have been nationally. And again, this is for women of all ages and status in terms of whether they're parents or not. And so we are seeing a slightly different trend than we are nationwide. So you can skip to the next slide. So this slide shows over the year employment. And, hopefully this period provides the most dramatic graph of Minnesota employment that you'll ever see. You can clearly see the drop in April 2020, and then the pattern of growth since then, which has been a little bit bumpy. As of April, this past April, last month, Minnesota is 166,000 jobs short of April 2019, which is also on the graph. That's that little peak there. And the private sector is 150,000 jobs short of its April 2019 level. You can go on to the next slide. So with this release, we're now comparing the over the year employment change to April 2020, the month of the deepest job losses during the pandemic recession, which saw a decline of 396,000 jobs, or 13.4% just in that 1 month alone. We had actually lost some jobs in March as well. And there was a 14.6% decline in the private sector. So this chart shows the over the year percent change. It's a little bit hard to interpret again because we're switching from that comparison to prior to the pandemic to the comparison with that huge loss in April 2020. Minnesota is still behind the nation in terms of the over the year growth, but we've been making up the difference with slightly stronger seasonally adjusted growth since January. February we were tied, and March and April we had slightly stronger growth as well. In both Minnesota and the US, all but 2 sectors are now showing over the year job gains. The sectors in Minnesota that have continued to drop during this period are logging and mining only by 118 jobs, and information. You can see their information just continues to lose jobs. It continued to lose jobs all year, and this really predated the recession. In Minnesota, over the year job gains were strongest in the 3 sectors hit hardest during the pandemic: leisure and hospitality, other services, and trade, transportation, and utilities. Minnesota had the most, had basically lost a larger share of jobs in the US and had a larger share of jobs to regain, and has a larger share of jobs to regain than the US. And you can see that on this graph. Growth is also strong in construction, which is now almost 1,000 jobs over its April 2019 level, as well as professional and business services and education and health services. Again, these are over the year changes. Education and health services actually lost jobs in April from March, from last month, on a seasonally adjusted basis. Government grew 3.1%. That was 12,000 jobs over the year. And that was almost all in local government. So federal government really did not lose any jobs during the recession. And state government has not made up all of its job loss. So local government is the one that really has been bouncing around, lost a lot of jobs, gained a lot of jobs. In manufacturing, April saw gains in durable goods and losses in non-durable goods manufacturing on a seasonally adjusted basis, but over the year, our strength has been in non-durable goods, particularly in the food manufacturing sector. Financial activities was essentially flat, adding just 81 jobs over the year. And in financial activities, they really, their losses really predated the pandemic recession. And so, you know, they haven't bounced back as much as other industries. 3 sectors in Minnesota. So these are the Minnesota US comparisons. 3 sectors in Minnesota showed strength over the year compared to the US: leisure and hospitality, other services, and government. All 3 of these super sectors lost a greater share of jobs in April 2020 in Minnesota compared to the nation, and therefore had more ground to make up over the year in Minnesota compared to the nation. So leisure and hospitality showed strength in both sectors, both arts, entertainment, and recreation, which was up 95% over the year. You don't see those numbers very often with employment. And accommodations and food services, which was up 66% over the year, with especially strong growth in full service restaurants, which was up 131% over the year. So full service restaurants were very much bouncing back last month. Other services also showed growth across the board, with the strongest growth in personal and laundry services, which I think we've mentioned in the past was just really hit very, very hard by the pandemic recession, but is now up 143% over the year. And then over the year growth in government, again, as I mentioned earlier, was driven by local government, which is up 5.5% in Minnesota. So you can go to the next slide. I'm actually, this is a slide that I typically spend some time on. I'm going to actually skip this slide because the commissioner talked about the seasonally adjusted numbers. This slide doesn't change a huge amount from month to month. But if you have questions on it, you can ask me afterwards. But I'm going to go to this slide, which is a table from research that we published yesterday that looks at worker outcomes over the first 6 months of the pandemic recession. So only through third quarter 2020, where we have to go back because we're using data that is on about a 8-month delay. So of the 631,000 workers who claimed UI between March and June 2020, that's that bottom line, this table tracks their employment outcomes during the next 3 months, so during summer of 2020. 75% of this group of 631,000 workers were employed during the third quarter of 2020, either from the job from which they had been laid off of, that was 59% of the group, or with an employer who they had previously worked, as a second job. So these were the multiple job holders, or with a new employer. 24%, that group that's labeled not employed, had not returned to work, and of those, 3% were no longer claiming UI. For those who returned to work, 19% in total saw a decrease. So this gets a little complicated. 19% saw a decrease of 10% or more in their hourly wage. So those who had switched employers were most likely to see that 10% or more decrease in their wage. So that's the 32% of workers who saw a 10% or more decrease in their hourly wage. And this is sort of the high level overview of this research. There's a lot more details in the article if you're interested, and we will continue to track these workers as subsequent quarters of data come out. We should have an update actually of this fairly soon for the fourth quarter of 2020. And I think we're going to take questions at this point.
Thanks, Orion. I see Dina Winter.
Can comment on some of the members of our congressional delegation who have been calling on the state to end the federal unemployment bonus to try to help, or extension to try to help get more workers back in the workforce. And then if you could talk a little bit about what the state requires in terms of unemployed people showing that they're trying to get back to work. I know when I was on unemployment, it was very early on in this pandemic, and I don't recall having to show, work out, applications and so on, but I'm not sure if that's changed.
Yeah, thanks, Dina. Certainly we've tracked this issue and heard some of the concerns around the $300 plus up. And again, this is a federal benefit, not a state one. I think the issue is far more complex than that narrow concern would indicate. There are a lot of factors in our economy right now that are causing challenges in the transition from the pandemic economy to the post-pandemic economy. You've got childcare issues. You've got geography issues, you've got transportation issues, you've got lingering concerns around safety in the workplace because COVID certainly hasn't left the state. And so there's a lot of complexity to this. And I think, our view of this is, yes, you need to keep searching for a job and you need to keep looking for a job. And we do ask you that every week in the system. We also, now that we're ramping up our proactive calls, ask you to show up to our conversations and go to our job clinics and in our engagements that help you find a job. But I think life's a lot more complex than that concern would indicate. And what you don't want to have happening is workers, and this is a statement for the overall growth of our economy, you don't want workers to come back and take a worse job than the one that they had. The concern we would have into the economy at a job at a lower wage rate, that doesn't help us for our growth. Did I just cut out for a second? I think I saw my internet flicker. Can people hear me?
Yep.
You can. Okay,
just
good.
repeat that last sentence, Commissioner? You just cut out for a second.
Yeah, sorry. I'm at the Capitol. My internet just kicked for a second. As Oriana just said in her last slide, those who change jobs, we want that number of those who change jobs to have their wages go up, right? Not down. So you don't want somebody who's, say, an RN to take a job as a CNA. You want them back in as an RN or a higher paying job. So there's value in our economy and people picking the right way to re-enter the economy. And that's what we're here to help workers do. And there are some states who didn't require workers to search for jobs throughout the pandemic, but we never set aside that requirement. We never changed anything about our system despite the nature of the pandemic as it related to the need to search for work.
Thanks, Commissioner. Dina, do you have another question?
Always. Do you have any idea why Minnesota's lost more jobs in hospitality and leisure than the United States? Do you have any thoughts on that?
The early, you mean in last April?
Yeah, according to the numbers you guys showed earlier, it just there was a slide that showed that Minnesota lost more jobs in the hospitality and leisure
compared to the average for the country.
Compared to the U.S., yeah.
I think any state that had a plan to fight COVID-19 that involved, business restrictions to ensure safety of employees and workers saw more job loss. It's just a very natural, outcome of business restrictions and the need to close down our economy early as we figured out what was happening with this virus and made the right decisions to move forward. But I think what's encouraging is we've had those jobs really come roaring back. You've seen a lot more people going back into that industry at a much higher rate than the rest of the country. So we see that as a positive, that it's a nimble marketplace and people are ramping back up really quickly. In fact, at a faster pace than the rest of the country.
Thanks. Kavita, let's go to you.
Yeah, hi guys. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of like wages in the marketplace. It seems like some of the data that Oriana was showed that like early on in the first 6 months, people were taking lower paying jobs. But there is like chatter now about fast food restaurants and a bunch of other employers who seem to be increasing wages as they're having a little bit of trouble filling some jobs. So I'm just kind of curious what you're seeing more recently. Are you seeing some wage growth across the market?
Do you want me to take that?
Yeah, please, Orion.
Yeah, over the year, it was only 0.3% increase, but there was some growth there in hourly wages.
I think it's important just to share here too that growth in wages is not a bad thing. Of all the open jobs we have in Minnesota right now, of all the job vacancies that we have, the average wage rate is about 80% of the median for the wage rate for the rest of the economy. So, you can imagine if you're looking for a job and the jobs that are out there pay less than the average wage in the state, it makes it a harder, it makes the decision a little bit more tricky. And at the same time, to be clear, no one's getting rich off of unemployment insurance. It pays half your normal salary. And even with that $300 plus up, that's still not much. And we know that the folks that are more likely to be on unemployment insurance long term are the lowest of low wage workers. So we've seen that average benefit payment just at the state level go down over time because it's the lower wage workers who are in the system. So, I think it's important to consider that when you look at some of the dynamics that are playing out in our state economy.
And that is actually something else that this article I was overviewing does, talk about and provide numbers on.
Thanks. We have a question in the chat from Theo Keith. Commissioner, would you address the issue of matching up the workers on the sidelines with all of the companies that have help wanted signs? What is that going to take?
Person on this job has looked for a job before, right? We all know the process. You look at your opportunities, you evaluate what's possible, you consider a whole host of issues, the hours, the wages, your childcare availability, your commute. So it's going to take a lot of different things for people to decide which job they take and for companies to decide what's the right match for them. The state's role in this is to make sure that we make as many of those connections as we possibly can. And so we have a team of workforce strategy consultants that works across the state with employers to understand their openings, to bring those openings to our career force centers and our career force system across the state. And when we are calling people proactively, again, thousands a week who are on unemployment insurance, in a very aggressive shift from our usual mode of operating, given the challenges that we face, and outlining the opportunities that are there, we're pointing to specific jobs in their region. We're trying to look at what's possible given the factors they bring to their job search. But I think that it's important to understand that the complexity of the job search for anybody is similar if you're on unemployment insurance as it is for anyone else. And we're trying to walk people through that and help them understand the opportunities that exist and hopefully help them find jobs that have long-term career potential. I think if the pandemic taught us anything, it's that some jobs have a long life and others are more vulnerable. And the more Minnesotans we can place in jobs of the future, given all the changes in our economy, I think the better off our productivity and state growth will be.
We're almost at time, so let's go back to Kavita for another question, and then happy to respond to any other questions if you shoot me and Oriana an email.
Great.
Yeah.
Was curious if you could talk a little bit more about, I know you said, obviously we did add jobs in last month, but it was the fewest number of jobs that we've added so far this year of any month. And you would think that it would be accelerating because more people seem to be hiring and vaccines are rolling out and there are lots of positive signs and there are other positive economic signs. So, I guess, were you surprised that, obviously there were the nationwide numbers that weren't great last month also, but are you a little bit surprised that the numbers weren't higher? They were half as much as the month before. And, you outlined some of the reasons why you think that maybe there may still be some tentativeness, but I don't know, if you could expound on it a little bit more about what you think is going on there.
Yeah, I think if it had happened, we might have been a bit more surprised. But having seen the U.S. numbers, I think we anticipated that we would not see something, massively different here. We were encouraged that we did a little bit better than the rest of the country on job growth. But, as I said, it's a tricky time in our economy, and it's not going to be a steady line, a steady, trajectory from the economy the pandemic gave us to the economy that will become our next chapter. What I can say is, you deserve a Department of Employment and Economic Development that works day and night to make sure that transition is speedy and as helpful for both businesses and workers as it can be. And that's why we are really reshaping our efforts here. I talk about those outbound calls. We talk about our strategy consultants. We talk about our approach to UI. All these things are trying to meet the moment that we're in to help workers and help businesses. We certainly hope for higher job growth numbers every month, to be clear, and we want to see that number go higher every month and are working our darndest to make it so. But I think it's hard to be patient when everybody wants so desperately for things to get back to normal, but there's a degree of this where you got to take the long view and hope that you're setting up your economy's fundamentals in the right way such that growth is possible. And I think that kind of speaks to the process we're in right now with the state budget of making sure that we are making investments that prioritize those who are hardest hit by the economy, that makes investments in building a really fertile ground for small business growth, for startup growth. Those are the things that are going to help define this next chapter of our economy and grow the most jobs. So there's a lot to this. There's sort of the day-to-day decisions that we make on our program implementation, but then there's also how we look down the road in the future in terms of what we build for the best chance of success.
Thank you. We are at time, so if you have any other questions, please send an email to me or we'll get back to you right away.
Great. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you later.
Thank you.